The wind had a bite that morning, sharper than anything I'd felt back home in Ohio. We were hunkered down behind a crumbling farmhouse somewhere outside Kane, the rubble dusting our boots like gray snow. I can still feel that chill in my chest, even after all these years. I lit a cigarette from my old tin, the one I've kept tucked in my coat pocket for decades. It's dented, scarred, and smells faintly of gunpowder, like memory itself. That tin is what I hold on to when everything else feels like it's slipping away. I'm writing this because I can't carry it anymore. I've tried silently for 70 years. But the truth keeps pressing. There's a moment I can't unsee, a choice I made that I can't explain without shame. And I think maybe, by putting it down here, unsigned, as if to no one, I might breathe a little lighter before the end catches me. Our outfit had been in France for just over a month, part of the push after D-Day. Nothing heroic in the way they'd write it later in books or papers. Just a company of tired kids and men like me, staring at ruined towns and wondering if the next corner would be our last. My squad was small. Me, a kid named Jimmy Collins, though he wasn't so much a kid, maybe 20 at the oldest, and our Sergeant Burke, who carried the kind of authority that made your stomach twist, even when he was only standing still. Jimmy was my anchor. He had this knack for noticing the little things. Like when I'd forgotten to oil my boots, he'd toss me a smirk and a rag. I don't know why, but I clung to that kind of ordinary detail. It made the chaos feel less infinite. Sometimes I'd imagine we were still back home, tossing a baseball in a vacant lot behind my old high school. Those thoughts were dangerous, I knew, distracting. But I couldn't stop. That morning, as the wind rattled the broken shutters, Burke barked orders we didn't question, leading us toward a road that ran through what looked like nothing but flattened hedgerow. The sound of mortar fire was faint in the distance, a drum beat that never seemed to stop, and there it was, on my wrist, glinting faintly even in the pale sunlight. My father's old watch. He had given it to me when I left for the army, told me it would keep time for me when everything else felt uncertain. I checked it more than I should have that morning. I don't know if I was trying to remember home, or if I was trying to remember who I was. Jimmy sidled up next to me, chewing on the edge of his lip. "You ever get the feeling," he said, "that something's coming, and you're already too late?" He didn't wait for an answer. I didn't give one. I just nodded and kept my eyes on the road ahead. There was a farmhouse on the corner, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. No sign of life, or maybe too much of it, I couldn't tell. Burke motioned for us to fan out, and then came the order. One I should have questioned, maybe. Should have argued. Should have done anything but follow it. But I didn't. I obeyed. And the consequences, God, the consequences, I wouldn't understand for weeks, and I never spoke of them after. There's a detail I've never told anyone, not even my wife, not even Jimmy, though he knows as much as anyone could. I hesitate to write it now because writing it feels like stepping into that rubble-strewn road again, feeling the wind in my lungs, hearing the faint pop of distant shell. But it's the only way to make it stop echoing inside my head. The sun was climbing higher by the time we moved. Smoke from the farmhouse cast long shadows over the field. I remember my watch catching that light, the second hand moving steadily while everything else felt like it had frozen. And I remember thinking, I didn't understand what that choice would cost until weeks later. Burke's voice cracked over the wind. "Move!" he shouted. I obeyed. Jimmy was beside me, trusting me to do the right thing. And I'm not sure I did. Even now I can feel the weight of that decision pressing against my chest. And it's just part one of what I've buried all these years. The field smelled of wet earth and burnt grass, like a funeral I wasn't ready to attend. We moved cautiously, boots sinking into the mud, the wind still cutting through our jackets. My father's watch ticked against my wrist, the sound faint but steady, like a heartbeat insisting on life in the middle of all this. I kept glancing at it, as if time itself could tell me what to do next. Jimmy stayed close, whispering things I barely registered, comments about the birds, the sky, the quiet, but his words were an anchor. He had this way of noticing when the tension in me got too thick, too heavy to carry alone. I wanted to tell him what was on my mind, the order that lingered like smoke in my lungs, but the words never came, partly because I wasn't sure I could explain it to anyone, partly because Burke's shadow was always there, looming, making hesitation dangerous. We reached the edge of the village, houses shattered, doors hanging open, windows empty or smashed. Something moved in the corner of my eye, a figure ducking behind a wall, trying not to be seen. My first thought was enemy. Then the second was that it might be a civilian. Either way, we had orders: sweep, secure, and report back. Simple words that didn't feel simple. "Cover me," Burke barked, motioning toward a crumbling doorway. I obeyed, but there was a knot in my stomach. A cold realization that obeying could mean something worse than what I imagined. Jimmy caught my eye, his lips pressed together, silent warning. He was trusting me to be steady, to follow the rhythm we'd developed, and I wanted to be that man. But my hands felt heavy in my gloves. I can't say exactly what made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way the smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney, the smell of old bread and burned wood mingling in the air, or maybe it was just the thought of the figure crouched behind that wall. But for a fraction of a second, I questioned the order. That fraction was enough to feel alive, and enough to know I could be responsible for more than I understood. We moved inside the building. The floorboards creaked under our boots, each step echoing in the hollow rooms. And then I saw it clearly. A child, no older than 10, eyes wide and frozen, pressed against a wall. Something about the way the child held a small bundle of blankets made my stomach churn. I could hear Jimmy's intake of breath behind me. Burke didn't see. He never saw what I saw, never hesitated, never questioned the orders. He only barked. I froze. The order was to clear the building. Clear it. And yet there was the child, breathing shallow, fragile. My watch ticked. Tick. Done. Tick. No. Each second pressing me to move, to obey, to do what soldiers do. I didn't know what was right. I only knew what was expected. Jimmy whispered, "We can't." But he didn't finish. He never finished. And I didn't act. I followed Burke's lead. We swept the rooms. The child, I left it behind. I don't remember running out of there. I only remember the sound of my boots hitting the broken ground outside, Jimmy at my side, and the wind slicing through the village, cutting us off from everything else. That evening, we camped on the edge of the river. I watched my watch again, feeling its weight, feeling every second of guilt I couldn't speak aloud. Jimmy tried to make small talk, jokes about home, but I could see he sensed something I couldn't admit, something that had changed me in a single quiet moment. I still don't understand why I followed the order. Part of me tells me I had no choice, that the hierarchy, the war, the chaos, all of it, made me act as I did. But another part of me, that part whispers that I chose the easier path, the one that let me survive while someone else, someone innocent, didn't. There's a detail I've never shared, not with anyone, and yet here it is, spilling onto paper, demanding reckoning. It's a detail that will haunt every memory I have of that day. Every time the wind bites, every time the mud sticks to my boots, every time I feel the steady tick of that watch. And the truth is, I can't stop thinking about it, even now, even decades later. because I still don't know if following orders is the same as being innocent. The next morning, fog had rolled in off the river, thick and white, settling into the hollows and between the ruined walls like it had a life of its own. My boots squelched through mud that clung like old regrets, each step heavier than the last. I kept checking my watch, not because I needed the time, but because the ticking reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still alive, and still responsible. Jimmy was quiet, unusually so. He was picking at a splintered fence post, his fingers black with mud. I wanted to ask him if he saw the same things I did the day before, if he felt the same pit in his stomach. But the words wouldn't come. Some things, I knew, couldn't be said. Not then. Not ever. And yet, silence sometimes spoke louder than any confession. Burke was his usual self, loud, precise, moving with that authority that made us all walk a little straighter, act a little faster. Orders flowed from him like water, and we followed, trying not to think, trying not to feel. But I couldn't shake the memory of that child, the bundle of blankets pressed to a small chest, the way its eyes had looked at me, uncomprehending, fearful, trusting. I kept turning it over in my mind, trying to imagine a world where I'd done something different. Anything different. The rest of the day was a blur of buildings to clear, hedgerows to patrol, and the constant thrum of artillery somewhere just over the ridge. Every time I ducked behind a wall or leapt over a ditch, the memory of that small figure pressed against my chest. I tried to justify it, telling myself the child would be safer hidden, that we had a mission. But the reasoning felt hollow, even as I whispered it to myself. Jimmy caught me staring at my watch again. "You thinking about it?" he asked quietly, almost too quietly. I didn't answer. How could I? Even naming it gave it weight I wasn't sure I could carry. Instead, I just nodded, letting the silence fill the space between us. Later, Burke called us over near a small stone bridge. A patrol had found evidence that the enemy had used civilians as shields, moving them from building to building, hiding among them. He didn't look at me, didn't even glance in my direction. But the words landed anyway. My stomach turned. The moment I'd frozen in yesterday's farmhouse suddenly felt enormous, like a weight pressing from all sides. I realized I'd been part of something I didn't understand, something I might never forgive myself for. Jimmy stayed close that night. We huddled near a small fire, the fog wrapping around us like it was listening. He muttered something about home again, trying to keep his mind off what had happened. I could see the unease in his eyes, the same unease I felt. We didn't talk about it directly. We didn't need to. The unspoken truth hung between us like smoke. That night, when I lay on my back looking at the gray sky, I turned my watch over in my hands. The glass was cracked, a faint line running across the face, and it made me think about how fragile time itself is, how fragile life is. I remembered the child, remembered the small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, and I realized, perhaps for the first time, that I had made a choice I couldn't justify, not then, not now. I tried to sleep. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying distant pops of artillery, and I kept thinking, did I do what I had to do, or did I take the easy path? Did following orders protect me, or did it make me complicit in something I can't explain? Jimmy snored softly beside me, and for a moment I envied his ignorance, his ability to sleep without carrying the weight of that decision. There's a detail I've never shared, not with anyone, and I know it will follow me until the end. Every tick of the watch reminds me. Every muddy field, every ruined building. Every time I close my eyes, I see it, like a shadow I can't outrun. And I can't stop asking myself, would I have done differently if I'd known what I know now? Because the truth is, I might not be able to live with the answer. Dawn broke gray and thin, spilling pale light over the shattered village like a bruise. The fog had lifted, leaving the rubble sharp and cold. My boots crunched over broken tiles and splintered wood, and the air carried that acrid smell of smoke mixed with damp earth. I kept my hand brushing over the watch, my father's gift, and the tick beneath my fingers felt louder than the voices around me. It was as if the seconds were counting the choices I hadn't undone. Jimmy was unusually quiet that morning, shadowing me as we moved between the ruins. He had a way of noticing when I wasn't myself, catching that tension in my shoulders, the hesitation in my step. I wanted to tell him, finally, what I'd done, or more accurately, what I hadn't done, but the words wouldn't come. I could see he suspected, though. The silence between us carried more weight than any conversation could. Burke barked orders from the far side of the square. "Sweep it clean. Every house, every corner. Don't let anything slip through." His voice was as hard as the rifle in his hands, as unyielding as the mud under our boots. We move, following the rhythm of command, our motions automatic, and all the while I felt that weight in my chest. The ghost of that child pressed to the wall, blankets clutched tight. We entered what was left of another building. The floor sagged, the ceiling a jagged outline against the pale sky outside. I spotted a small figure crouched near the far wall. My heart leapt before I realized it was only a cat, fur-matted and eyes wide. A false alarm, and yet the sight brought the memory back with a punch. Small chest rising and falling, eyes frozen, the soft sound of breath barely there. I could almost feel the child's tiny fingers against mine, and I had to look away. Jimmy whispered, "You're thinking about yesterday." I nodded, trying to force the motion to feel casual, but he wasn't fooled. He always noticed. "Does it bother you?" His voice was quiet, careful. I wanted to say yes, that it tore at me every second, that I couldn't sleep or eat or think without that image, but I just shook my head, muttered something about fatigue, and moved on. By mid-afternoon, we were outside again, huddled near the edge of the village, scanning for any sign of enemy movement. That's when it happened. A brief flare of mortars, the ground trembling under us. Instinct took over, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I dived behind a low stone wall, heart hammering, mud soaking my uniform. Jimmy followed, swearing under his breath, and then Burke's voice cut through the chaos. "Check that building." He didn't wait for hesitation or questions. He didn't see the hesitation I felt, the shadow of yesterday's choice stretching between us. I obeyed. I led the way, boots heavy, hands trembling inside my gloves. Each step, each creaking floorboard, each echo in the ruined room felt like a judgment. There was nothing there, no one, nothing but dust, the smell of burned wood, the faint traces of life that had once been, but the weight remained. The decision I'd made, or failed to make, was still alive, still there in the tick of my watch, in the look Jimmy gave me when he thought I wasn't watching. That night, we camped in the open, the stars obscured by smoke drifting from the distant front. I kept my watch in my hands, turning it over and over, feeling its edges like it carried the measure of my guilt. Jimmy tried to distract himself with stories of his hometown, but I could see the way he glanced at me, wondering if he should ask, and wondering if I would tell. I didn't. Not yet. The moral weight of obedience, of survival, had started to shift from theory to something tangible, something I could feel pressing into my chest. I realized that following orders, even orders that seemed correct in the moment, could leave shadows that stretched long and far, longer than any battlefield. And I knew I would never get that moment back. Not with Burke, not with Jimmy, not with anyone. I've carried it this long. I can't carry it much longer. Rain fell in a steady drizzle the next morning, soaking everything through in a gray, endless wash. The mud clung to our boots in thick layers, weighing down each step. My father's watch had stopped somewhere in the night. I noticed when I checked it, and I felt a strange emptiness, as though time itself had paused and left me behind. I tucked it under my sleeve, against my skin, hoping its presence alone would remind me that I was still here, still breathing, still responsible. Jimmy was unusually silent, trudging beside me, his gaze fixed on the ground. He kept kicking at the puddles, sending water splashing up, but not a word came. I knew he was thinking about the day before, about the child, about the orders, about the way I'd moved and not moved. I could see it in the tension in his shoulders, in the way his jaw clenched. We didn't speak. Sometimes the quiet was worse than the noise. Burke appeared suddenly, his figure sharp against the mist, voice slicing through the drizzle. Clear the eastern side, every building, every alley, every doorway. He didn't pause for questions, didn't wait for hesitation. He never saw the hesitation I felt, the shadow of yesterday's choice still clinging to me. I obeyed. I led the way down the muddy lane, Jimmy at my side, each of us carrying the weight of unspoken truths. In one of the ruined houses, I found evidence of the same thing we'd glimpsed the day before. Signs of civilian life, small belongings abandoned in haste, a tiny shoe lying in the corner. My stomach twisted. The choice I had made, or failed to make, was not abstract. It had consequences, and I could feel them pressing down on me, as heavy and unyielding as the rain. Jimmy touched my arm lightly. "We can't just ignore this," he whispered. But what could we do? The orders were clear. The chain of command was clear. And I, for all my hesitation, was still just a soldier, a cog moving in a machine that didn't pause for conscience. I looked at him, saw the fear and the moral doubt mirrored in his eyes, and I realized we were both trapped. By late afternoon, the rain had turned to a fine mist, and we were stationed on a ridge overlooking the fields. The enemy was quiet, the usual distant thrum of artillery replaced by an uneasy silence. I kept my hand brushing over my watch, feeling its cold metal against my skin. Every tick, real or imagined, seemed to remind me of the child, of the moment frozen in memory that I could never take back. Burke walked past, oblivious to the weight we carried. He barked orders at someone down the line, then turned back, his face hard, unreadable. I watched him go, and for a moment I envied his certainty, his ability to act without hesitation, without conscience slowing him down. But I couldn't be that man, and I knew I never would. Jimmy spoke again, quieter this time. "Do you ever think about it? About what we did or didn't do?" His eyes searched mine for an answer. I shook my head, not trusting my voice, not trusting myself. I couldn't admit the truth, not yet. Not until I could put it down somewhere that no one would see me, where the confession could exist without judgment. That night, as we lay in the mud under a tattered tarp, I thought about the ripple effect of a single decision, how one hesitation, one failure to act, could shape everything afterward. I felt the weight of it pressing into my chest, a steady, unrelenting pressure, and I knew, deep down, I was only at the beginning of carrying it, because the truth doesn't stay buried. It waits, it follows, and sometimes it finds you when you least expect it. The morning air was sharp and thin, carrying the smell of wet mud and smoke from distant fires. I could see the ridge ahead, the patchwork of flattened fields and shattered buildings stretching toward the horizon. My boots were caked in mud, but I hardly noticed. My eyes kept drifting to the watch beneath my sleeve, the small, unassuming circle of metal that had been my anchor and my burden. since the day I failed. Its steady tick was the only rhythm I could trust. Jimmy was beside me, silent but tense. There was an edge to him now, a caution in every movement, a wariness that hadn't been there before. I knew he was still thinking about the child, about the farmhouse, about the orders we'd followed without question. I wanted to speak, to tell him I felt the same weight, but the words stuck somewhere in my chest. How do you confess something like that without breaking the fragile rhythm that keeps a man alive? Burke appeared suddenly, striding across the field with that same unflinching certainty. Sweep the southern sector. No one left behind. His voice carried, sharp against the wind. There was no pause for doubt, no room for hesitation. I obeyed, as always. I led the way down the slope, Jimmy close. Every step a reminder that our choices weren't abstract. They were real, immediate, and unchangeable. In one ruined house, we found signs of recent occupation. A tattered coat draped over a chair, a small tin cup on the windowsill, footprints pressed into the mud outside. The evidence hit me like a punch to the stomach. I realized suddenly how fragile life was in this place, how easily innocence could be destroyed by a single decision. The child's face flashed in my mind, eyes wide, uncomprehending, and I felt the same pit of guilt that had been gnawing at me since that day. Jimmy leaned close. "Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing?" he whispered. I wanted to tell him I didn't know, that I feared we hadn't, that obeying orders had made us complicit in something I could never explain, but I only shook my head. Words felt inadequate, and so we moved on, leaving the evidence behind, leaving the questions unasked. By afternoon the sky had darkened, clouds heavy and low. The field beyond the ridge was quiet, too quiet, as if the land itself held its breath. I felt a tremor of unease, a warning I couldn't name. My watch ticked steadily, indifferent to the chaos and moral uncertainty that surrounded me. Each second seemed a stretch, marking the slow, relentless passage of time, and the unrelenting weight of what I had done and failed to do. That night, we camped in a small grove, the trees sheltering us from the wind. Jimmy lay close, pretending to sleep, but I knew he wasn't. I couldn't sleep either. I traced the edge of my watch with my thumb, feeling the cold metal and the tiny scratches, each one a reminder of the days, weeks, and decades that had passed, each one a silent witness to the choice I made. And in the quiet, I realized something I hadn't faced before. The consequences weren't just immediate. They would follow us, shape us, define us long after the gunfire stopped, long after the orders were forgotten. The weight of that day would not lift, and the questions, quiet, insistent, would never leave me. I've carried it this long, and I can't imagine laying it down until I tell someone, or something, the truth, because time doesn't forgive, and memory doesn't forget. The fog rolled in heavy that morning, settling over the fields and shattered buildings like a blanket I couldn't lift. Each step through the mud felt slower than the last, my boots pulling at the earth as if it wanted to hold me back. I kept my hand on the watch, feeling the cold metal press against my wrist. Tick, but tick, mai. A rhythm I could trust, even as everything else felt uncertain. Jimmy walked beside me, shoulders hunched against the damp air. He said nothing, but his silence was loaded. I could feel the questions he wanted to ask, the doubts he wrestled with, and I knew they mirrored my own. We'd carried the same secret for days now, though neither of us could name it aloud. Burke's shadow appeared over the ridge, sharp and exacting. "The northern sector! Move!" he barked. There was no room for hesitation, no time for reflection. We obeyed, moving like automata across the gray landscape. the remnants of buildings watching us with empty windows. We entered a farmhouse, its walls scorched, roof half collapsed. I noticed signs of life. A small chair knocked over, a tin cup cracked and abandoned. Footprints pressed into the dirt floor. My chest tightened. The evidence of innocence lost, or overlooked, was all around me. I remembered the child, the bundles of blankets, and the way I had frozen, had obeyed, had left. My stomach turned with the weight of it. Jimmy touched my arm lightly. "Do you ever think we maybe should have done something?" His voice was low, almost afraid to disturb the ghosts in the room. I wanted to answer, to confess everything, but the words stuck. I only nodded, because even nodding felt like admitting too much. Later, as we made our way across the field, a distant flare of gunfire shattered the quiet. Instinct took over. I dove behind a low stone wall, Jimmy following, mud plastering our uniforms. The sound of shells hitting somewhere beyond the ridge made me flinch, made my heart race, and I realized I could obey orders, follow the rhythm of command, and still feel complicit in something I could never justify. By dusk, we set up near a ruined barn. Jimmy tried to lighten the mood, talking about home, baseball, the mundane things we used to joke about. But the words hung empty. I could see the same shadow in his eyes I felt pressing in my chest, the unspoken knowledge of what had been left behind. I traced the watch under my sleeve that night, feeling its cold edges and the tiny scratches I hadn't noticed before. Each tick was a reminder, each second a witness. I thought about the ripple effect of one choice, how a single hesitation or obedience could shape the rest of your life. I thought about the child, the farmhouse, Jimmy, and even Burke, and I realized that the weight of it wouldn't end on the battlefield. It wouldn't end when the war did. It wouldn't end in quiet reflection or in years of mundane life back home. The choice and the consequences would follow me until the end. I have carried it this long, and I know I will carry it until I write it down, until I let someone, anyone, hear the truth, because time, memory, and conscience don't forgive, and neither do we. The morning was oddly still, the kind of quiet that makes a man listen for ghosts. The fog had thinned, leaving a gray light that flattened the shapes of ruined houses and battered fields. I kept my hand on the watch, feeling its familiar weight, the tick beneath my fingers steady, relentless, as if marking not just the passage of time, but the measure of everything I'd done or failed to do. Jimmy was beside me, carrying his rifle, his face drawn tight with exhaustion and unease. He didn't speak, and I didn't ask. By now, the silence between us had grown thick, a language of its own. We knew what the other carried, even if neither of us had the courage to name it aloud. Burke's voice came over the ridge, crisp and exacting. "Check the east sector. Every building, every cellar. Move." We obeyed. I led the way into a half-collapsed farmhouse, mud sucking at our boots, smoke from distant fires curling through the open doorway. And then I saw it again. The evidence I'd glimpsed before. Signs of life, hastily abandoned. A small shoe in the corner. A tin cup cracked and blackened. The child I had frozen with, the bundles of blankets I had left behind. They were gone, vanished like a shadow. But the memory of them, and the weight of what I had done, pressed into me harder than ever. Jimmy muttered something low. "It's all around us, isn't it?" His voice trembled slightly, carrying the same fear and guilt I felt. I didn't answer. How could I? Even saying the truth aloud wouldn't undo the choice, wouldn't lift the weight from my chest. The day dragged on, each step across the fields heavier than the last. I could feel the ripple of my decision spreading, reaching farther than I'd imagined. Civilians we'd passed, footprints left in the mud, empty houses. They were all reminders that one moment, one failure to act, could echo in ways you couldn't measure. By nightfall, we camped near the river. The stars were hidden behind smoke and clouds. I took the watch from under my sleeve, tracing its edges, feeling every nick and scratch. Each tick was a quiet judgment. I thought about the child, about the farmhouse, about Jimmy and the weight he carried without speaking. I thought about Burke, who acted without conscience, and me, who had acted with it too late. I wrote this letter because I need someone to know, even if that someone is no one. The choice I made, or failed to make, has followed me all these years. I can still see the child's eyes, still feel the weight of obedience pressing against my chest. I can't explain it. I can't justify it. I can only lay it down here, in the hope that writing it makes it a little lighter, even if only by the smallest fraction. I wonder sometimes, would you have done differently? Would you have paused, hesitated, acted? Or would you have followed orders too, leaving the consequences to time and memory? I don't know. I only know the choice is mine, and it has shaped the man I became, the decades I lived, the quiet confessions that never found a listener until now. Time has not erased it. Memory has not dulled it. And the watch, my father's gift, my only companion through all of this, reminds me still. Some choices never leave us, no matter how far we run, no matter how much we try to bury them. I leave it here, unsigned, because I can't carry it anymore.